I wanted to ask you about this. This is a subject I find really interesting. In your thoughts, should churches be tax exempt?
Um, I don't know. I think it's difficult because there's some that I think there should be a bar where that's lower for churches, like for religious organizations. I think there should still be a bar that they have to meet as far as like charitable donations, how much of it is going towards like just internal
Mm-hmm.
things. I think that's a difficult question because it's a tough line to draw of where is I mean, the Church of Scientology is the largest landowner
In the LA
in Los
area.
Angeles,
Yeah.
and they're tax exempt completely.
Well,
But
and you
then,
know why they like buy so much land is because to be a nonprofit, you can only have a certain amount of liquid cash, like
hmm
easily accessible cash in the bank. And so they just are like, oh, we're getting close to our cash threshold.
so
Better
they buy
go buy
land and real
land.
estate. Yeah, exactly. But then there's also the flip side where religious organizations can do a lot of good that comes from the money that would be taxed anyways. So it's difficult for me to say, oh well, these people, especially from donations, like donations from people, that being taxed seems like weird to me, taxed on both ends, or because it doesn't get taxed for the person giving it. They
Yeah,
can,
it's a deduction.
it's a deduction, but that's because it's um because they're characterized as nonprofits and um these kind of not tax havens, but like just you can't that donations aren't taxed, and then so it seems weird to me that you would tax it on the other end when it's coming out. So I don't know if you can really. I think it's difficult, and I don't know how you do it, and I think it's being exploited, but also I would rather have it exploited by some people when, in my opinion, the majority of religious organizations aren't really exploiting that and are actually doing good with the money they receive.
What are your thoughts on religious influence in politics? Acceptable or not acceptable?
I think that's part of the larger conversation with all special interests. It's it's an organization that has a set of values and is wants those would like those values perpetuated in law. Um, and so I think it just
But
needs to
there
be.
is a specific constitutional amendment that says, religion and state shall be separate. Like this is like a specific constitutional requirement.
But I think there's a difference between. So I don't think you should be able like pushing specific religious beliefs as far as like doctrine in religions. I don't
Okay.
think like I think that's more where church and state comes in, and I think religion just acts as a special interest group that because if you start to say, I mean, what's the difference between a religious organization asking like wanting some political like something lobbying for something as the NRA or
The religious organization is specifically like addressed in the Constitution.
but why is it different? I
What do you
think
mean?
I don't know why that should be something different than any other special interest group.
I don't know either, but I think. Would you agree that the amendment in the Constitution says specifically there is a separation between church and
I
state?
think it applies more though to like you couldn't have a state religion that you have to do.
See, I disagree. I
I
think it's pretty broad.
I don't know because I would say that's kind of arbitrary. It's arbitrary that you would say specifically religious organizations are the only special interest groups that can't lobby for their beliefs.
Yeah, a little arbitrary.
It's extremely arbitrary. So I think the intention was more that we are not going to we're not going to force a certain religious doctrine on people. I don't know if that makes sense. Like you can't have Like, you're not going to have
No,
the Bible
I see what
taught
you're
in
saying.
school.
I interpret it as more vague, as like there has to be a separation between, because take for instance in Utah, right? We live in a state where the LDS Church, I don't know if you're going to agree with this, but dominates politics, or certainly has a major influence on state policy, right? That to me should be illegal. And I don't know why no one has like sued to like say this is unacceptable, that the church is like, this is, Utah's an extreme example of
Yeah.
why that, in my opinion, and of why that constitutional amendment applies here, because there are policies that are literally agreed upon, and in the final hour, the church sends a letter that says we don't agree with this because A, B, and C, and the bill is dead.
Yeah.
Like, that kind of stuff is unacceptable.
But that happens with like the NRA too.
Sure.
So
I agree. I agree.
I don't think you should go and take in the way. I mean, the NRA and religious organizations are obviously like very different, but they are both special interest groups that have a bunch of members that kind of all believe the same thing, have similar political interests. And so to say, oh, the NRA can lobby, but a religious organization can't.
So do you
doesn't make sense to me.
not disagree that it's different when a person's church or someone's religion is advocating something? Don't you think they have a different kind of responsibility to that religious organization than the NRA? Because I think they do. I think that if I was a religious person and my church came out and said, if you support this, like, God hates this, so if you support this and blah blah blah, I would feel a special responsibility to change my opinion.
I mean, it could be like that, but you can't determine that. I mean, I'm sure there are people that are as committed to the NRA and like Second Amendment rights as there are to religious organizations. So to make that distinction seems entirely arbitrary to me.
Right, but you're using two things that are, you're using what is like a political issue, right? The NRA is like a political issue, whereas the church has a set of values and ideals, right?
But so do, I mean, what's a Second Amendment? Like, those are values and ideals about the Second Amendment, and they're applying that to political issues. I don't know. I just think that it should be treated like a special interest group. And I think special interest groups should be way more highly regulated than they are now. And that applies across the board to any special interest group.
So you do not see, let's take this like to you. So you don't see a problem with a church influencing a congressman or woman's decision in a case or in a bill, on a bill. You do not see an issue with that on a massive scale.
No, I do, but in the broader sense that...
But you see the issue with everyone.
With any special interest group is the same. And so if you're going to start determining what special interest groups are... And I think there's a difference between if a religious organization says, like, just states their position on a matter, and also if they start spending money to, like, actively... like lobby.
And the LDS Church does have lobbyists.
Yes. So I think that should be regulated, but across the board. There's a million special interest groups that lobby like that should be way more heavily regulated. And special interests play too big a role in politics to me. And I think that applies whether it's a religious organization, the NRA, like the NAACP, like any of those organizations shouldn't have as much political power as they do.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think special interests are... I think... See, I've heard there's like people that will try to defend special interests, like, these Congress people wouldn't know about this issue otherwise, or we just go in and inform them. It's like, I don't really know if I subscribe to that view.
And I think there's
I'm sure they do get informed, but it's like... I also think they get informed with the massive check you write them too.
Yeah, there's
I'm sure they care about that massive check more than they care about any information you have to give.
Yeah, there's a difference between kind of between just spreading information. Like, a special interest group can educate, is like, I think that's entirely okay. If their entire point is to bring attention to an issue, totally fine. But it's when when politicians become beholden to special interests because there's financial incentives to do that.
What
that's where there's
what
a
about when
problem.
they become beholden to special interests because they feel a obligation morally to?
I think though it's up to the constituents. I think that's disclosed to a certain extent, but you have to do what's best for your constituents, and you shouldn't be a politician if you're not going to do that.
So that would be immoral.
If your constituents didn't agree with you and you were doing something that went directly against the
Yeah, if you were doing something, okay.
yeah. So like,
I would agree with that for sure.
If it was,
if a state, for example, in Utah, when the Prop 2 got passed, which was the legalization of medical marijuana.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was a while ago, so I'm not totally informed about the situation, but they took it to a vote to the people. So the Utah public voted in favor of Prop 2. And then the Utah legislature just didn't want to enact it. Like, there was a bunch of issues. Like, they couldn't figure out the funding. They didn't know how they were going to do it.
Yeah.
And at one point, they were like, we're not going to do it. I was like, what the heck? What is this?
Yeah.
That's like Brexit in freaking Britain.
Yeah. Or even, there's a lot of times that you see with, like, oil companies and stuff like that where they're even directly harming constituents of people, but because they have lobbyists and people in Washington talking to the politicians, you get stuff that directly harms constituents, like destroys the environment. You get that, and that's where special interest groups are a problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that.